It was a couple of months ago, and my friend's cousin, who's a single mother, bought a new cell phone. And after a long day of work, she came home and placed her phone on the counter and went to go watch TV. Her son soon came after to ask her if he could play with her new phone. She told him not to call anyone or mess with text messages, and he agreed. At around 11:20, she was drowsy, so she decided to tuck her son in and go to bed. She walked to his room and saw that he wasn't there. She then ran over to her room to find him sleeping on her bed with the phone in his hand. Relieved, she picked up her phone and began to inspect it. She browsed through it and only noticed a couple of minor changes: a new background, some new apps, and a couple of saved pictures. As she scrolled through the pictures, she began to delete some that he had taken, until there was one last picture that shook her to her core. When she first saw it, she was in disbelief. She couldn't believe what this picture was or who was in it. It was her son sleeping on her bed, but the picture wasn't taken by him. It was taken by someone else who was above him. It was a selfie of him, and in the top left was half of an elderly woman's disfigured face. My older sister has a ghost that's followed her around for years. I lived with her once for about 3 months, and so much weird stuff happened in that time. All my sister would say to me when I mentioned it was that her ghost didn't like me being there. Things like going to bed with everything locked up and switched off, and waking up in the morning with the back door open, lights on, and the kettle switched on. One night my sister and I were getting ready to go out, and I'd asked to borrow her liquid foundation. I used it and put it back where she kept it. 10 minutes later, she's asking me for it, and it was nowhere to be seen. She accused me of taking it and made me buy her a new one, and refused to listen to my side of the story. About a year or so later, when she was packing to move to a new house, she found the makeup in a shoebox with some old letters. The shoebox was zipped up in a suitcase that was underneath her bed. But probably the most scared I have ever felt was one afternoon when I was the only one in the house. This rarely happened, as 4 other people lived there. I arrived home from work and headed straight to the bathroom. All the doors, windows, etc., everything was closed. I was standing in the bathroom and started squeezing a pimple on my chin when a female voice in the hall said, "Stop picking your zits." It was loud enough and sounded real enough, and at the time I thought it was my sister, so I laughed and told her to leave me alone, and asked what she was doing for dinner. No answer. I stuck my head out into the hall, and no one was there. I searched the house top to bottom, and there was no one home. I sat out on the front porch until someone else got home, because I didn't want to be in there alone. This is a story I do not often tell. I promise sincerely that this has scarred me for life. And although I have looked into psychological explanations for what I heard and natural explanations for what occurred, they remain unsatisfactory. When I was a child, I was scared of the dark. I swore to my mother I heard voices in it. They were not evil, but they were not familiar, and so they scared me. It was not uncommon in the middle of the night for me to wake up and hear whispers, as I would call them. She figured they were just bumps in the night and typical kids' nightmare material. I tried often to explain to her that it was more than that they sounded different from one another, the way people's voices do. On some nights I would get so scared from these whispers that I would sleep in my mom's bed with her. It was an added bonus that the bathroom was directly outside of her bedroom door for my late night tinkles. I should add at this point that when walking into the hall to go to the bathroom, you look directly down the stairs that would lead you into my living room on the first floor, as my mom's bedroom was on the second floor. On one such night around Christmas, I awoke and felt the need to relieve myself. I walked out from the door and distinctly heard the phrase, "Look." And to my astonishment, a red light, almost like a spotlight, was cast upon the wall at the very bottom of the stairs. The light had no other source, it was by itself, and I was transfixed by it. Being a little kid and it only being a few days from Christmas, I knew what this light was. It was Santa. How else could he get into my house to know I was being a good boy? I was so excited I began walking down the stairs to greet him, picking up my pace after the second step as it began to creep off the wall and fade into a darkness into my living room. That's when I heard him, a very strong masculine voice, different from the first, not at all like my father's. Not to say that my father's isn't masculine, it was just distinctly different. It said, "Stop right now, go back up those stairs." I listened, turned around, and what happened next I'm not sure I would believe if someone had told me the same story. After reaching the top of the stairs, I heard a very loud crash that sent me running back to my mother's bed, where I jumped straight under the covers and stayed there the whole night. When we awoke the next morning, the poinsettia lights my mother had put on the railing down the stairs were pulled straight down to the bottom of the stairs, some broken from what seemed like a forceful tear, laying in a single pile. The dry sink in my living room had fallen from the wall. My mother could not explain it. My father was worried we had been the victims of a home invasion. My sister was crying. There was nothing missing. Nobody had broken in. There did not seem to be any reason this had happened. And then I saw it, and I kept quiet about it because I was so afraid that I could not force the words out of my mouth. There, on the edge of a wooden dry sink which had been facing up, were 3 indentations where the finish on the wood had been worn, almost as if in a forceful grip. Something down there had grabbed it and threw it down. That was what the bang was. I was mortified, and after that day I never heard a single voice again. I don't like to imagine what was waiting downstairs for me that night, if it was anything at all, but I can tell you that the reality was that something physically acted upon 2 things in my house near the bottom of the stairwell. After this I had never heard another whisper again, which is sad, because in some ways I would have liked to thank the man that had stopped me from going down those stairs. This happened when I was 7. I'm 20 now, and because of this incident I'm still afraid of the dark, especially shadowy stairwells. I was babysitting my niece once while I was studying at my brother's place, and they had a baby camera set up so I could see her on the little TV it came with. I was studying one day and started dozing off when I heard some whispering and realized it was coming from the monitor. I initially thought it was some feedback or something, but when I looked at the TV, there was a dark shadow near my niece's crib. I've never been more terrified in my life, but the shadow was clearly there, where it had not been before. I ran into my niece's room and looked around and saw nothing, but I took her out of there anyways. I went back to the TV and the shadow was clearly gone. I told my brother what happened, and he pulled me aside and told me not to mention it to my sister-in-law because she'll freak out, but that he had seen that same thing several times now, and the same with the whispering. They stayed in that house for about 4 more years, and when my niece was just learning to talk, she would tell her mom about her special friend. And to this day it scares me out of my mind. When they moved out, my brother told me my niece had become inconsolably sad because she would miss her friend. Her mom would tell her she could bring him along, but all my niece would say was that he wouldn't be able to leave the house. We have never to this day told her about that shadow, and she apparently never saw it. I didn't know that's what it was called until much later. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day, my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off, and I was alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and a living room on one side, then a bathroom with 2 entrances. On the other side of the bathroom was a hallway that had windows on one side and 2 bedrooms on the other. From my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser and I just noticed movement out of the corner of my eye and looked down there. There was, an honest to God, this gives me goosebumps just typing it. 17 years later, a black figure, maybe 3 feet tall, and it was only vaguely humanoid. It looked like black scribbles, like someone had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved like electricity arcing. That's the best way to describe it. There was no sound that I can remember. I distinctly remember when I saw it, I wasn't afraid, just like, what is that? Then it noticed me looking at it. I can't say it turned around, it just focused on me, I guess. Then I was scared. I didn't move, didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen. Because it just came at me, it rushed down the hall towards me. I have no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut. I screamed, I yelled for my wife. She wasn't home. I went outside into the daylight and didn't go back until she got home about 10 minutes later. I don't believe in ghosts, and I don't believe I saw something supernatural, but I know I saw something, and I don't know what it was.